മാറിലം മിന്നയും കയ്യിൽ കൊടും കൊല വാളുമെഴുമൊരു മൂർത്തി കാവിലുണ്ടെങ്കിലും ഇല്ലെങ്കിലും ശരി മേവിടുന്നുണ്ടയാൾക്കുള്ളിൽ.
The ritual arts, with their roots in pagan ancestry and dedicated to the worship of nature and the mother goddess, have existed long before temples and organized religions did. When the ancient deities were transplanted into the enclosed spaces of the temple, the arts that celebrated them too found their way there. The passage of time and the lack of proper patronage have, however, threatened many of these ritual arts with oblivion. Mudiyata is one ritual art form that has survived the tribulations of time. Even today, it continues to flourish as a major ritual art performed to placate the mother goddess Kali. During the Mudiyata season, the Kali or Devi temples along the banks of the Periyar River, the Chalakudi River and the Muvatupura River in Ernakulam, Thrissur, Kottayam and Idukki districts in Kerala come alive with the pulse and throb of this ancient art form. Mudiyata is a post-harvest Thanksgiving agrarian community rite which has deep links with ancient vegetation and fertility cults. A Mudiyata performance is a sacred offering to the mother goddess for a rich harvest and for the protection of crops from drought and downpour. In Mudiyata, the entire community participates in the performance.
കാളി എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ഒരു മാതൃദേവത എന്നുള്ള നിലക്ക് രക്ഷയും ശിക്ഷയും ഒരേ അവസരം, അത് എല്ലാ മാതൃദേവതകളും ആ രീതിയിൽ തന്നെയാണ് ഉണ്ടാവുക. രക്ഷിക്കുക മാത്രമല്ല ശിക്ഷിക്കുകയും ചെയ്യാൻ ഒരു മാതാവ് എന്നുള്ള നിലക്ക് അധികാരമുള്ള ഒരു ദേവതയാണ്. എല്ലാ ദേവതയും അങ്ങനെയാണ്. കാളി ആ കാര്യത്തിൽ വളരെ മുൻപന്തി നിൽക്കുന്ന ഒരു ദേവതയാണ്. ഈ ഒരേ അവസരം കാളി ശിക്ഷിക്കും. പക്ഷെ അതോടൊപ്പം തന്നെ അതിനെ പ്രീതിപ്പെടുത്തിയാൽ അത് രക്ഷകയാണ് എന്നുള്ള രീതിയിൽ ജനങ്ങൾക്ക് ബോധ്യപ്പെട്ടിട്ടുണ്ട്. അങ്ങനെ ബോധ്യപ്പെട്ടതുകൊണ്ടാണ് ആവശ്യം വരുമ്പോൾ താണ് വീണ് അപേക്ഷിച്ചാൽ എന്തും നൽകാൻ. ഇപ്പോൾ കാളിയുടെ ഭാഗമാണ് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ വസൂരി എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. വസൂരി കൊടുക്കുകയും എടുക്കുകയും ചെയ്യുന്ന ദേവതയാണ് കാളി. അതുകൊണ്ട് ഈ രണ്ട് സങ്കല്പവും ഒന്നിന്റെ തന്നെ ഒരു നാണയത്തിന്റെ ഇരുഭാഗമാണ് രക്ഷയും ശിക്ഷയും എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. അതാണ് കാളിയിലും നാം കാണുന്നത്.
As with all ritual arts, it is difficult to trace the historical roots of Mudiyata. The word Mudiyata itself refers to the imposing and impressive headgear, or the mudi, worn by the artist who assumes the form of the goddess Kali. The art of Mudiyata is unique. Yet, today, it is also vulnerable as a sustainable art form. It was this that prompted UNESCO to accord Mudiyata the privileged status of being part of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity. At the heart of Mudiyata lies the sacrosanct ecological principle found in the old and trusty saying, Kava Tendiyal Kudivellam Muttum, which means destroy the grove and you will parch the land. For the Kava does not only house the deity, it also maintains the delicate ecological balance of all nature around it, down to the smallest organism. And Kali, or the goddess Bhagavati, is the guardian of this space, a revered deity who is deeply reflective of the cosmic principle. The villagers believe that it is this symbiotic and inviolable relationship between them and the Kava which ensures that their wells rarely go dry. Traditionally, the right to perform Mudiyetta is inherited by the male members of the Kuruppa and Marar communities of Ernakulam, Kottayam, Thrissur and Idukki districts in Kerala. The performers usually hail from the Kirillam, Parur and Koratti families. For them, to be a Mudiyetta performer is a divine privilege. Mudiyetta requires a great deal of rigorous self-discipline, which includes a period of penance and ritual purification during the season. The main source of livelihood for the traditional Mudiyetta artist performer has been a share of the monetary and other offerings made by the devotees during the performance.
കാളിവേഷം ആദ്യം ചെയ്യാൻ തുടങ്ങുന്ന വർഷം ഞാൻ 8 കാളിവേഷങ്ങളാണ് ഒരു വർഷം ആകെ ചെയ്തത്. 8 മുടിയേറ്റ് ഞങ്ങൾക്ക് ഉണ്ടായിട്ടുള്ളൂ. അതിൽ നിന്ന് മാറി കഴിഞ്ഞ വർഷം 70 മുടിയേറ്റുകൾ ഞാൻ അവതരിപ്പിച്ചു. ഈ വർഷം അത് 80 മുടിയേറ്റോളം ബുക്കിംഗ് ആയി കഴിഞ്ഞു. ആ സ്ഥിതിക്ക് മുടിയേറ്റ് വളരെ മുൻപോട്ട് പോയ സ്ഥിതിക്ക് മുടിയേറ്റ് കലാകാരന് മുടിയേറ്റ് കൊണ്ട് ജീവിക്കാൻ പറ്റും എന്നുള്ളത് സംശയലേശം തന്നെ എനിക്ക് പറയാൻ സാധിക്കും.
It's only recently that schools and institutions have started providing training in this ritual art. Traditionally, instruction in this art form has always been handed down from veteran performer to novice, an arduous process during which the student follows the master from kava to kava, season through season, while he slowly but surely absorbs the intricacies of this demanding art form. It is an apprenticeship that can last for many years.
മുടിയേറ്റില് വേഷങ്ങൾ ചെയ്യുമ്പോൾ ആദ്യമായിട്ട് ശിവൻ എന്ന വേഷത്തെയാണ് ആദ്യം ചെയ്യുന്നത്. ശിവൻ കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ നാരദനാണ് ചെയ്യാറ്. അപ്പോൾ നാരദന്റെ ഇതായിട്ട് സാഹിത്യങ്ങൾ പഠിക്കണം. സാഹിത്യങ്ങൾ പഠിച്ചാലാണ് നാരദൻ ചെയ്യാറ്. നാരദൻ കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ ദാനവേന്ദ്രൻ എന്ന കഥാപാത്രത്തെയാണ് പിന്നീട് ചെയ്യിക്കുന്നത്. ദാനവേന്ദ്രന്റെ ഭാഗമായിട്ട് കൂളി പുറപ്പാട്, കോയിമ്പടനായര്, ഇതിനുശേഷമാണ് സാധാരണ ദാരികൻ പുറപ്പാട് ചെയ്യാറുള്ളൂ. മറ്റ് 6 വേഷങ്ങളും ചെയ്തതിന് ശേഷമാണ് സാധാരണ കാളിവേഷത്തിൽ എത്തിപ്പെടാറ്. എന്നാലും കാളിവേഷം ചെയ്യാത്ത പല കലാകാരന്മാരും ഇന്നും മുടിയേറ്റിലുണ്ട്.
There is no rehearsal or preparation for the performance. The founding of the Varanata school has proved to be a pioneering moment in organizing training sessions in this art form's various aspects, like the melam, that is music, and the costumes or vesham. Perhaps the most remarkable feature of the school is that it is open to anyone who wishes to learn the various aspects of Mudiyetta regardless of their caste.
പണ്ട് മാരാർ കുറുപ്പ് സമുദായത്തിൽപ്പെട്ടവർ മാത്രം മരുമക്കത്തായ സമ്പ്രദായ വഴി അവതരിപ്പിച്ചിരുന്ന ഈ അനുഷ്ഠാന കല ഇനി നശിച്ചു പോകാതിരിക്കുവാനായി ഇന്ന് കിഴക്കേ വാരനാട്ട് മുടിയേറ്റ് പരിശീലന കളരിയിൽ കൂടി ഹിന്ദു സമുദായത്തിൽപ്പെട്ട അനുഷ്ഠാനത്തോടുകൂടി ഈ കല പഠിക്കുവാൻ തയ്യാറുള്ള എല്ലാവരെയും പഠിപ്പിക്കുകയും 1 വർഷം കൊണ്ട് അവരിൽ പലരുടെയും അരങ്ങേറ്റം നടത്തുവാൻ സാധിക്കുകയും ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ട്.
This boy is a Pulayan from the Dalit community who bears out Kurup's words. In many ways, Mediator approximates the norms and ideology of theatre. And, like theatre, the allure of a Mediator performance is born out of the overall impact of gesture, movements, rhythm and performance. The three cardinal principles of theatre, or Tauryatraga, are beautifully fused into the structure of Mediator. Here, the Angika Vinaya comprises of Idunnatam, Padinyatam and Ilagiyatam. It is the last of these, Ilagiyatam, that sets the actor free to improvise and manipulate the pace and rhythm of his movements, as he invokes the various rasas. The subtle inner conflicts and contradictions that seize the major characters are portrayed through intricate bhava vinaya. The dialogues are sprinkled with Tamil words. In a Mediator performance, the conventional ideas of theatrical space become irrelevant. It is in fact visualized as occurring in all of boundless space itself, with the temple yard, the surrounding landscape, and even the star-studded sky, providing a natural and fitting background to the often fiery theatricals of the performance. In a Mediator performance, the curtain or the Yavanika or Tirashila plays a larger and more significant role than it does in conventional theatre. It provides the spectators with an awareness, however illusory, of spatial reality where each unfolding scene in the performance is localized. A Mediator performance opens with Shiva on Mount Kailas, listening to Narada reading a Varola. Here, the imaginative use of the Yavanika adds to the overall dramatic impact of the scene. In the second scene, with its lead motif of Dwarika's victory, the Yavanika implies the geographical separation between Dwarika and his adversary. This device cunningly suggests that Dwarika has placed himself atop Udaya Parvatam, near Astamaya Parvatam, but is still very far from Yamakuda Parvatam. The Yavanika in Mediator also highlights the entry of its major characters. The space in a Mediator performance is constantly shifting and evolving. The music in Mediator invokes a priceless heritage that strives to recapture the primal harmonies of a lush and pristine landscape through an assortment of percussion and wind instruments like the chenda, the ilathalam and the shankar.
കാളിപ്പുറപ്പാടിന് ആദ്യം ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്നത് ചെമ്പടതാളം. ഡിഡിൻ നനഗണ 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 ഡിഡിൻ നനഗണ ഡിഡിൻ നനഗണ നനഗണ നനഗണ. അടുത്ത് ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്നതിന് ചമ്പ താളമാണ്. ചമ്പ താളം ദാരികന് വേണ്ടി ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്ന താളമാണ്. തിക്കി 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 ഡിണ്ടടനകൻ ഡിണ്ടട ഡിങ്കടനകൻ ഡിണ്ടടനകൻ.
മുടിയേറ്റിന് പണ്ട് കാലത്ത് കാളിപുറപ്പാടിനും ദാരികം പുറപ്പാടിനും പഞ്ചാരി അഞ്ചാം കാലമാണ് കൂട്ടിയിരുന്നത്. എന്നാൽ പിന്നീട് അത് കാളിപുറപ്പാടിനും ദാരികം പുറപ്പാടിനും ഒരേ താളങ്ങൾ വരുന്നതുകൊണ്ട് അതൊരു ആവർത്തന വിരസത അല്ലെങ്കിൽ കേൾവിക്കാർക്കൊരു സുഖം കുറയും എന്നുള്ളത് കൊണ്ട് കാളിപുറപ്പാടിന് മുറിയടന്ത താളത്തിലേക്കാക്കി മാറ്റി. മുറികടന്ത കുട്ടി അങ്ങനെ പോന്നപ്പോൾ അത് മുറികടന്തേക്കാളും കേൾക്കാനും യുവതലമുറ ഉൾക്കൊള്ളുവാനും പറ്റിയ ഒരു താളം കണ്ടെത്തണം എന്ന് ധരിച്ചിട്ട് ചമ്പ താളത്തിലേക്ക് ആക്കി. കായൂർ ദാമോദര മഹാരാജ് സ്മാരക ദുരൂഹത്തിൻ്റെ മുടിയേറ്റിനകത്ത് പ്രധാനമായിട്ടും ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്ന താളം മുറികടന്തയാണ്. ആ മുറികടന്ത താളത്തിലാണ് ആദ്യത്തെ രംഗം മുഴുവനും കംപ്ലീറ്റ് നമ്മൾ താളം പിടിക്കുകയും കൊട്ടുകയും പാടുകയും ചെയ്യുന്നത്. അപ്പം ആ മുറികടന്ത പിടിക്കുന്ന വിധം ദാരികൻ്റെ പുറപ്പാട്, അതുപോലെ ഭദ്രകാളിയുടെ പുറപ്പാട്, അതുപോലെ കൂടിയാട്ടം, അതായത് യുദ്ധരംഗം. ആ യുദ്ധരംഗത്തിലൊക്കെ മുഴുവൻ നമ്മൾ കൊണ്ടുവന്ന ഒറ്റക്കോല് കൂട്ടും. ഉലകമേ
The songs of Mudiyattar are mostly a synthesis of Malayalam and Tamil and follow the Sopanam tradition. Every song is set to a particular raga and thala. Some of the more popular ragas on the Mudiyattar performance circuit are the Mukhari, the Neelambari, the Ananda Bhairavi, the Mohanam and the Bilahari. The various masks and costumes of Mudiyattar have a distinctive ethnic flavor. Through them, mere mortals are transformed into malevolent asuras or compassionate devas. Dharika's costume resembles the costume of Kathakali with its prominent headgear and facial makeup, while the back portion of his costume is reminiscent of that of the Chakyar in another traditional Kerala performance art form, the Kuta. Kali's makeup brings out her fierce, avenging nature. The imposing arch of the headgear is decked with the kuritola, or tender coconut leaves. Spots of rice flour paste on her face indicate the scars of smallpox. The costume and makeup of Dhanavendra is similar to that of his elder sibling Dharika. Narada's costume is of a more sober disposition than the other characters in a Mudiyattar performance. A Mudiyattar performance invariably begins with a Kalameritha, in which the image of Kali is drawn painstakingly on the ground. As in other ancient ritual arts, the colors used in the Kalameritha are derived from nature. Kali is drawn in 5 colors, or the Panchavarna: white rice powder, yellow turmeric powder, red from blended turmeric and lime, black derived from burned coconut husk, and the natural green of leaves. The 5 colors symbolize the 5 elements of water, air, sky, fire, and earth. The master craftsman begins to give shape and texture to the kalam in the afternoon itself. The number of the goddess' hands may range from 8 to 32, depending on the size of the image. Blank spaces are filled in with the black or burnt paddy husks.
കളമെഴുത്തിൻ്റെ ഉത്ഭവം എന്താണെന്നറിയണ്ടേ? ഭദ്രകാളി ദാരികവധം കഴിഞ്ഞ് കോപാക്രാന്തയായി കലി ബാധിച്ച് ത്രിഭുവനങ്ങൾ ഞെട്ടിക്കുമാറുള്ള അട്ടഹാസത്തോടുകൂടി ദാരിക ശിരസ്സുമായി കൈലാസത്തിലേക്ക് വരികയാണ്. ഈ വിവരം നാരദ മഹർഷി പരമശിവനോട് ഉണർത്തിക്കുകയും ദേവിയുടെ കോപം ശമിപ്പിക്കുവാനുള്ള ഉപായം ഭഗവാൻ ആരായുകയും ചെയ്യുന്നു. അന്ന് കൈലാസത്തിലുണ്ടായിരുന്ന കുറേ കലാകാരന്മാരെ വിളിച്ചു വരുത്തി കാട്ടിലെ പച്ചിലകൾ പറിച്ചു പൊടിച്ച് ആ പൊടി കൊണ്ട് നിമിഷ നേരം കൊണ്ട് ദേവി വരുന്ന വഴിയിൽ
ദേവിയുടെ ദാരികശിരസ്സുമായിട്ടുള്ള ഭയാനകമായിട്ടുള്ള രൂപം നിർമ്മിക്കുവാൻ ആജ്ഞാപിക്കുകയാണ്. അവരാകട്ടെ ഭഗവതിയുടെ ആ ഉഗ്രരൂപം നിമിഷ നേരം കൊണ്ട് നിർമ്മിച്ചു. ദേവിയാകട്ടെ വരുന്ന വഴിക്ക് തൻ്റെ ഈ ഭീകര രൂപം കണ്ട് കുറച്ചു നേരം മന്ദാളിച്ചു നിന്നു. തൻ്റെ ഈ രൂപം ആരെങ്ങനെ നിർമ്മിച്ചു എന്നാലോചിച്ച് ആ ആലോചന കൊണ്ട് ദേവിയുടെ കോപം ഒട്ടൊന്ന് ശമിച്ചു. ഈ രൂപമെഴുതിയ ആൾക്കാരെ ദേവി അന്വേഷിക്കുകയും അവർ ഭക്തിപുരസ്സരം ദേവിയുടെ കാൽക്കൽ ചമ്രം പണിഞ്ഞിരുന്ന് ദേവിയെ സ്തുതിച്ച് പാടുകയും ചെയ്യുന്നു. ആ പാട്ടാണ് പിന്നീട് കളംപാട്ട് എന്ന നാമധേയത്തിൽ പ്രചാരത്തിലായത്.
Once the image is complete, the deity is invoked during the Kalam Puja. As dusk falls, the temple and its surroundings slowly take on an otherworldly air, quite unlike their everyday one. The rising tempo of the percussion seems to sense this, as does the waiting audience. The legends and mythology of Kali animate the atmosphere. The concluding stage of the ritual begins with the erasing of the image from its feet upwards. Only the breasts remain. The powder that went into their making is collected and distributed to the devotees as prasadam.
മുടിയേറ്റ് മറ്റ് സങ്കല്പ അല്ലെ മറ്റു നാടക രൂപങ്ങളിൽ നിന്ന് വളരെ വ്യത്യസ്തമായി തീരുന്നത് ആദിമധ്യാന്ത പൊരുത്തമുള്ള കൃത്യമായൊരു കഥയുടെ വെളിച്ചത്തിൽ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ കഥയാണത് അഭിനയിച്ച് രംഗത്ത് അഭിനയിക്കുന്നത് എന്ന് കാണാം. ഒന്നാമത്തെ രംഗം കൃത്യമായി പറഞ്ഞാൽ വിഷയം അവതരിപ്പിക്കുകയാണ്. എന്താണ് ഈ കഥയുടെ വിഷയം എന്നാണ്. നാരദൻ ഭൂമിയിലൊക്കെ സഞ്ചരിച്ചിട്ട് വന്നിട്ട് ശിവനോട് പരാതി പറയാണ്. ഇങ്ങനെ ദാരികൻ എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞിട്ടൊരു അസുരനുണ്ട്. ആ അസുരൻ ലോകത്തെ മുഴുവൻ നശിപ്പിക്കുകയാണ്. അതുകൊണ്ട് ആ അസുരനെ നമുക്ക് വകവരുത്തണം.
The second stage of the performance sees the demon king Dwarika presenting himself before the audience. His exaggerated gestures betray his fierce pride and arrogance. This is the most spectacular part of Mudiyetta. It is with Kali's appearance that the boundaries between audience and performance, and, it seems, of even time and space, begin to disintegrate. He receives from the priest the unmistakable insignias of Kali, or Devi, the garland and the sword. Slowly, the spirit of the goddess possesses him. No longer is he an ordinary mortal, but a supreme being of unearthly and unpredictable power. The mesmerized crowd is in thrall of the goddess as she circles the temple. As the circuit draws to a close, what is by now the combined energy of performer and audience reaches a climax of frenzied passion. Kali puts on the mudi and challenges the Asura brothers to battle.
ചന്ദ്രൻ ചിന്തിയിടുമാരെ ചടിച്ചിന് ഇരുന്ന കാലം ചിന്തിന്റെ ശ്രീശൂലം കൊണ്ട് കുത്തിപ്പിഴക്കും
Coimbadar is the prototypical image of the theatrical clown, whose jocular insights into the ongoing drama reveal a deep and wise intelligence. Coolie is yet another character whose humorous words and actions provide comic relief to an otherwise solemn mediator performance. The slaying of Dwarika is suggested through the theatrical metaphor of removing his mudi, followed by the performance of his last rites. The demon being vanquished, Kali offers anugraha to the people who thronged to witness the ritual, offering them the techi flowers that bedecked her mudi. In the parlance of Mudiator, this is known as Tiruvirichal. The last rite is Mudivirichal, with Kali distributing her mudi to the devotees as tokens. Mudiator is one of Kerala's greatest contributions to world theatre. Fascinating and ultimately liberating.
Welcome to the new session on information literacy and libraries. Information technology is changing our environment at an increasing rate by providing improved opportunities, required knowledge and skill that are not easily acquired. Once we acquire such knowledge and skill, to keep them up to date is even more difficult. Information literacy is increasingly important in the environment of rapid technological change and proliferating information resources. Too much information can create barriers in our lives. Information literacy is a set of skills needed to find, to retrieve, analyze and use information. It provides skills to know when we need information and where to locate it effectively and efficiently. It enables the users to analyze and evaluate the information they find. The concept of information literacy was first introduced in 1974 by Paul Zakarsky. According to him, people trained in the application of information resources to their work can be called information literate. They have learned techniques and skills for utilizing the wide range of information tools as well as primary resources in molding information. Information literacy. The concepts underlying information literacy are not new. The idea that the students must first decide what type of information they need, figure out where to find the information, consider how to find the information and then determine if the information meets their needs has always been the basis of traditional research cycle. Today, information literacy is no longer limited to the world of librarians and information professionals. It is spreading into the educational community as a whole and more specifically into international organizations such as UNESCO. Information literacy is concerned with teaching and learning about the whole range of information sources and formats. Information literacy forms the basis for lifelong learning. It is a set of abilities requiring individuals to recognize when information is needed and have the ability to locate, evaluate and use effectively the needed information according to Association of College and Research Libraries. The American Library Association's Presidential Committee on Information Literacy final report states that to be information literate, a person must be able to recognize when the information is needed and have the ability to locate, evaluate and use effectively the needed information. It enables learners to master contents and extends their investigations to become more self-directed and to assume greater control over their own learning. The first step in the information problem solving process is to recognize that an information need exists and to define that need. The student should be able to A. Recognize different uses of information, that is occupational, intellectual and recreational. B. Place the information needed within a frame of reference, that is who, what, when, where, how and why. C. Relate the information needed to prior knowledge. D. Formulate the information problem using a variety of questioning skills, that is yes, no, open-ended, etc. Steps in information literacy strategies. 1. Knowing the requirements. The first step in the information literacy strategy is to clarify and understand the requirements of the problem or task for which information is sought. The basic questions asked at this stage are: what is known about the topic, what information is needed, and where can the information be found. Number 2, locating. The second step is to identify sources of information and to find those resources. Depending upon the task, the sources that will be helpful may vary. Sources may include books, encyclopedias, maps, almanacs, etc. Sources may be in electronic, print or other formats. Number 3, selecting or analyzing. The step 3 involves examining the resources that were found. The information must be determined to be useful or not useful in solving the problem. The useful resources are selected and inappropriate resources are rejected. Number 4, organizing or synthesizing. It is the fourth step that information which has been selected is organized and processed so that knowledge and solutions are developed. Examples of basic steps in this stage are discriminating between fact and opinion, basing comparisons on similar characteristics, noticing various interpretations of data, finding more information if needed, organizing ideas and information logically. Number 5, creating or presenting. In step 5, the information or solution is presented to the appropriate audience in an appropriate format. Types of information literacy. Computer literacy. Computer is a tool that facilitates and extends our abilities to learn and process information. Computer literacy is generally thought of as familiarity with a personal computer and the ability to create and manipulate documents and data via word processing, spreadsheet databases and other software tools. Network literacy. Network literacy is the ability to locate, to access and use information in a networked environment such as the World Wide Web. Digital literacy. Digital literacy is the ability to understand and use information in multiple formats from a wide range of sources when it is presented via computers. It is the awareness, attitude and ability of individuals to appropriately use digital tools and facilities to identify, access, manage, integrate, evaluate, analyze and synthesize digital resources, construct new knowledge, create media expressions and communicate with others in the context of specific life situations in order to enable constructive social action and to reflect upon this process. Visual literacy. Visual literacy is defined as the ability to understand and use images, including the ability to think, to learn, to express oneself in terms of images. Media literacy. Media literacy is the ability of a citizen to access, analyze and produce information for specific outcomes. Those who advocate media literacy recognize the influence of television, motion pictures, radio, recorded music, newspapers and magazines have on us daily. Information literacy standards. In school education, national standards of the American Association of School Librarians that reference information literacy and are inclusive of national content standards include: 1. The student will access information efficiently and effectively. 2. The student will evaluate information critically and competently. 3. The student will use information accurately and creatively. Association of College and Research Libraries, a division of the American Library Association, released the Information Literacy Competency Standards for Higher Education. There are 5 standards which are directly linked to a host of performance indicators. These standards and performance indicators are often considered the best practices against which institutions of higher education can implement and assess information literacy programs. The standards are: Standard 1. The information literate student determines the nature and extent of information needed. Standard 2. The information literate student accesses needed information effectively and efficiently. Standard 3. The information literate student evaluates information and its sources critically and incorporates selected information into his or her knowledge base and value system. Standard 4. The information literate student individually or as a member of a group uses information effectively to accomplish a specific purpose. Standard 5. The information literate student understands many of the economic, legal and social issues surrounding the use of information and accesses and uses information ethically and legally. These standards are meant to span from the simple to more complicated, or in terms of Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives, from the lower order to the higher order. The lower order skills would involve, for instance, being able to use an online catalog to find a book in an academic library. The higher order skills would involve critically evaluating and synthesizing information from multiple sources to a coherent interpretation or argument. There are 5 standards and 22 performance indicators for assessing information literacy competency. The standards focus upon the needs of the students in higher education at all levels of education. The standards also list a range of outcomes for accessing students' progress towards information literacy. These outcomes serve as guidelines for faculty, librarians and others in developing local methods for measuring students' learning in the context of an institution's unique mission. Need for information literacy study. Research and development activities in information literacy have been focused on education both in schools and in higher education. Especially in the last 20 years, library scientists have advocated the importance of information literacy and have developed standards, especially for application in higher education. The focus of information literacy research has often been primarily on universities. There is evidence of engagement by teachers and academicians with the implications for pedagogy of the changing nature of information resources and information use, but equally there is a recognition that more needs to be done to transform education into a form suitable for the preparation and continuing education of peoples in the information age. This is particularly so as some policy makers have focused only on the prerequisite task of acquiring the skills to use new information communication technologies. Information literacy includes wider issues about the ways in which technologies frame access to information and the skills needed to interpret and use information effectively. The wider corpus of information literacy needs to be understood and promulgated in order that the advantages of the information society can be realized. The essential difference between ICT skills and information literacy is illustrated by the distinction that can be made between receiving and transmitting information using ICT and the process of transforming information to create new knowledge using information literacy before transmitting the new information. Information literacy and libraries. Library and information professionals aim to ensure that all persons throughout the world to avail the same opportunity and participate in the information society without any hindrance to physical, mental, regional, social or cultural barriers. Information literacy recognizes that the library professionals, educators and users need to work at their ability to be information literate over a lifetime. It encompasses the sustained ability to acquire and use information as appropriate to any situation within and beyond the library, both locally and globally. It involves an array of competencies appropriate for individuals and groups to survive and function successfully. It covers all forms in which information is communicated and carried, like visual, textual and sound, and all forms by which human beings process information, including braille, sign language and oral traditions. Library professionals and special educators should not only be adequately information literate but also must develop teaching abilities beyond that of basic user education or user instruction programs in order to include new kinds of outreach activities. Library information professionals will be able to know that a need has arisen to create a special collection. The uncertain quality and expanding quantity of information also pose large challenges for society. Sheer abundance of information and technology will not in itself create more informed citizens without a complementary understanding and capacity to use information effectively. An information literate person is seen to have the ability to recognize when he needs information and to identify, locate, evaluate, organize and make effective use of that information to resolve issues and problems. Basically, information literacy provides the foundation for lifelong learning, which is increasingly viewed as a fundamental human right. UNESCO refers to the importance of information literacy in terms of capacity building. That is, everybody should have the opportunity to acquire the skills in order to understand, participate actively in, and benefit fully from the emerging knowledge societies. The 2003 Information Literacy Meeting of Experts in Prague identified information literacy as a powerful community tool that facilitates access to information that has real impact on its health, wealth and well-being. Information literacy skills are vital to future success and therefore information literacy skills must be taught in the context of the overall process. Instruction in information literacy skills must be integrated into the curriculum and reinforced both within and outside the educational setting. The researchers are the generators of new information. They recognize the need for information, collect the data, analyze the data, and generate new information. The researcher who is not an information literate cannot generate new information. They must know when the information is needed, how it is collected and from where it is collected and how it is processed and utilized. So, study of information literacy is very important for the library and information professionals, not only to provide better collection and best services for their clientele, but also to make the users information literate. Increasing attention to information literacy in recent years is partly due to the result of information overload, especially related to the growth of digital information, which has even caused a new ailment called information fatigue syndrome, and partly because of the new focus on student learning in a lifelong learning context. It has also created a need for a reconceptualization of the roles and responsibilities of library and information professionals in a new learning environment. Although there has always been a need to find, evaluate and effectively use information, the abilities needed to do so have just grown larger, more complex and more important in the information and communication technology environment. There is also a shift towards broader context to connect information literacy with an active, effective and responsible citizenship supporting personal empowerment and an enriched life through lifelong learning. And it is an important factor in the corporate sector. In this context, several reports have emphasized the importance of finding, evaluating and using information, although the term information literacy is not used. For example, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development representing and 7 other countries, has highlighted the role of information related competencies in several reports. The report, The Knowledge-Based Economy, discussing the increasing demand for more highly skilled workers, includes the following observation. The knowledge-based economy is characterized by the need for continuous learning of both codified information and the competencies to use this information. As access to information becomes easier and less expensive, the skills and competencies relating to the selection and efficient use of information become more crucial. Capabilities for selecting relevant information and discarding irrelevant items, recognizing patterns in information, interpreting and decoding information, as well as learning new and forgetting old skills are in increasing demand. Another report, Learning to Bridge the Digital Divide, put it this way. The skills of finding and interpreting information are seen to be more important than the skills of retention and recording, and the ability to seek and exchange information using databases and networks is not simply dependent on access to technology, but requires possession of the necessary technical skills. In addition, it calls for basic competence in being able to choose, classify, and critically evaluate the information that becomes accessible. The report also expressed concern that many students lack experience in information handling and in effective independent learning, and encourages schools to develop the learning environment in ways that give students a more active role that support the ability to find information and transform it into knowledge, and provide skills how to find interesting, relevant and reliable information and how to work with it. The OECD's Educational Policy Analysis 2001 states, the knowledge economy is based on the production and use of information and knowledge. The ability to produce and use information effectively is thus a vital source of skills for many individuals. And again, the report Learning to Change, ICT in Schools, notes, in a world with easy access to huge source of information, the skills of accessing, handling and using data and materials become more important than the ability to recall in detail ever greater amounts across many fields of knowledge. However, information handling skills are seen in this report as a part of digital literacy. To conclude, information literacy occurs at the intersection of teaching, thinking and learning within the broader environment of technology. We can define information literacy as a set of skills needed to find, retrieve, analyze and use information. Students should be prepared to apply the information skills they learn as students to all aspects of their lives as citizens, family members, employees and professionals. Information literate students have transferable skills from their formal education they can use throughout life as a means towards continued learning. The various efforts on behalf of information literacy represent an extraordinary convergence of several forces concerned with educating accrediting agencies, state legislatures, employers and university administrators, faculty and librarians. In addition, it reflects some of the most progressive thinking on pedagogy. It takes into account the changes brought both in the academy and in the society of which it is a part by the rapid development in computer technologies. But despite all of these forward-looking elements, information literacy also looks back. It is founded upon some of the oldest goals of education to inculcate a spirit of critique and independence of mind. It is becoming a more important part of school education. It is also a vital part of university level education. In our information-centric world, students must develop information skills at an early stage of education so that they are prepared for post-secondary opportunities, whether that be the workplace or in the pursuit of education. Here are some assignments to work on. 1. Define the concept information literacy. 2. Explain the elements of information literacy. Explain the standards of information literacy. Here are some references for future use. Information literacy, a literature review, retrieved from www.learnhigher.mmu.ac.uk by Zakowski Paul. Information literacy competency standards for higher education, retrieved from www.acrl.org by Association of College and Research Libraries. Information literacy, retrieved from www.ala.org by American Library Association 1986. Computer literacy, retrieved from www.acrl.org by ACRL 2000. Network literacy, retrieved from www.acrl.org by ACRL 2000. Thank you for watching this session. See you next time. Until then, bye.
Today we have Professor Bala R. Iyer from Raman Institute with us. Professor Bala, after completing his PhD from Mumbai University, in 1980 he joined Raman Research Institute. Professor Bala is also an expert, a leading astrophysicist, particularly in the fields of general theory of relativity and gravitational waves, and we are very fortunate to have him here and discuss with us the new trends in these fields. And I would take this opportunity to welcome Professor Bala onto this discussion, and I am sure in the coming lectures we will be very benefited by his talks. Bala, I would like to ask you one important question at the beginning. What is the need to go for general theory of relativity in order to understand the astrophysical phenomena? Can you please explain that to us?
Thank you, Babu, for getting me here to this conference, which helped me share my excitement over the subject with the audience. Basically, one should remember that general theory of relativity, which was Einstein's triumph and which started with Einstein's modification of Newton's theory of gravitation, was a theory which came about in 1916. However, for a large amount of time it has remained a subject which was thought to be very difficult, very exotic, and very irrelevant to the rest of physics. However, the situation changed drastically in the 1950s, because suddenly it was discovered that the universe was not a very mild place. discoveries in radio astronomy told us that the universe was a very violent place, and the large scale energy processes in the universe could only be explained by considering them as gravitational effects. Therefore, suddenly in the area of astrophysics there opened a new subject called the subject of relativistic astrophysics, and this was necessary to understand the phenomena related to quasars in regard to things like the pulsars, the neutron stars, and eventually the cosmic microwave background. So today one would say that general relativity is a part of the astrophysics, and therefore if a student wants to seriously do astrophysics, he cannot but understand general theory of relativity. Only then he has a complete understanding of what is happening in the universe.
We know that in the macroscopic world most of the equations are very well explained in terms of the Newton's laws of motion, and the astrophysical bodies have been explained in terms of the Newton's law of gravitation. If these are two highly successful theorems which are formulated by Newton, now where exactly is the need for the formulation of special theory of relativity by Einstein, and which latter he refined to formulate the revolutionary general theory of relativity? If you can explain and link the Newton's equations of motion to the special theory of relativity and general theory of relativity, that will be highly beneficial to all the people who are interested in working in this area.
Well, the journey is a very fascinating one, and to sort of say it briefly, one says one can try to look at what was the situation in the early 1900 when Einstein came into the situation. So it was known, as you rightly pointed out, that the basic interactions with which one understood the universe was basically related to electromagnetism and the theory of gravitation. And rightly, as you pointed out, Newton's theory of gravitation was very successful in explaining many things which we knew about the solar system. So then what was it, what was really there which made Einstein rethink this fantastic matching? So the basic thing really is related to the fact that though people realize that the equations of electromagnetism were well known, still there was something about it which was sort of mysterious, and this was related to the way one considered the propagation of light. For example, if you look at the speed of light, it was known that even though one considered the speed of light to be a universal kind of value, it implied either that the speed of light was a particular value related to some unique frame, or it was the value which every observer would sort of measure. Experiments really seem to show that irrespective of the state of motion of the observer, you always found that the speed of light did not change. Because of this, Einstein was forced to reconsider the equations of mechanics, which predicted that the speed of light would be different in different frames of reference. And when trying to understand this, he basically realized that if you believed that the laws of physics would be the same for all observers, whether they are at rest or whether they are in the state of uniform motion, and together with this you assume that the speed of light was the same for all inertial observers, then immediately you realize that the laws of mechanics as we knew them needed to be modified. So this led us to the special theory of relativity. Now in 1907, when Einstein was reviewing the special theory of relativity, he sort of realized that his job was only half done, because he had not considered the other major interaction with which we understood the universe, that is the force of gravitation. He realized that the force of gravitation was still described by an instantaneous interaction, and according to special theory of relativity, no interaction could propagate faster than the speed of light. We also sort of realized that within Newton's theory of gravitation, the source of the gravity was just the rest mass of a body. However, relativity told us that all forms of energy are equivalent to mass. So if you really believe in the special theory of relativity, it was more natural that the source of gravity should be something more general than the rest mass of a body, that is the energy momentum content of the body itself. These kind of general ideas, together with a very deep insight which Einstein had, and this is related to the fact that every observer in a uniform gravitational field falls with the same acceleration. This fact was known to Galileo, it was known to Newton, and Einstein felt that such a fundamental property of the equations of gravity should find a reflection in the theory of gravity itself. So from 1907 to 1915, Einstein went through a series of steps which basically generalized the special theory of relativity to allow for observers who are in general accelerated. It also tried to understand the consistency of gravity with the special theory of relativity, and finally he arrived at what we call today as the general theory of relativity.
Bala, we all know that the Newtonian equations are mostly used in the Euclidean geometry, whereas the Einstein's equations are all developed in the non-Euclidean geometry. So we would like to know what is the fundamental difference between Euclidean geometry and non-Euclidean geometry, and how the formulation of non-Euclidean geometric equation simplified the formulation and understanding of the general theory of relativity. It would be very beneficial to all of us if you can tell a few lines about that.
It is interesting to sort of see that historically, in fact the question which you asked is how Einstein actually arrived at our present understanding of the general theory of relativity. Because as I explained to you, in 1907 Einstein realized the central role which the equivalence principle should play in the formulation of the theory of gravitation. This basically told him that when you consider a theory of gravitation, in addition to considering observers in uniform motion, you should consider observers who are accelerated. In more generally, you have to consider that all observers, irrespective of their state of motion, are valid observers for whom the laws of physics should take the same form. So once you allow accelerated observers as being legitimate observers to describe the theory of gravitation, Einstein realized that if you looked at a thought experiment considering of a rotating disk, now if you take a rotating disk and try to measure the ratio of the circumference to the diameter, if the disk is not rotating, you would get the expected answer of pi. Einstein argued that in the rotating disk, if you had a measurement of the circumference by putting rods along the circumference, these rods would be Lorentz contracted, whereas the rods which measured the diameter, which would be along the radii or along the diameter, they would not undergo Lorentz contraction. So if you try to measure the ratio of circumference to diameter in an accelerated frame, a rotating frame, remember, is an accelerated frame, then you would not get an answer equal to pi. This is a reflection of the fact to a mathematician that the geometry is different from the flat geometry. It is a non-Euclidean kind of geometry. However, Einstein argued that the effects of acceleration and the effects of uniform gravitational field, they are sort of similar. So if accelerated frames of reference are equivalent to non-Euclidean geometry, indeed a description of gravity should also involve non-Euclidean geometry. So finally Einstein realized that if you want to simply describe gravity, it is better to describe it as a non-Euclidean geometry rather than assuming from the start that it is described by Euclidean geometry.
So am I right in saying that the so-called acceleration is essentially a geometrical manifestation? Is that the way you put it? Is a manifestation of the geometry in the non-Euclidean space?
Yeah. So I would sort of state it slightly differently. I would sort of say that it gave Einstein the clue that the accelerated effects of acceleration can be simply thought of as equivalent to a non-Euclidean geometry, and by the equivalence principle this should apply equally to the gravitational field, because by experiments you cannot distinguish between the effects of acceleration and the effects of the gravitational field. So it is more natural to assume that gravity is manifested by the non-Euclidean nature of space-time.
Okay. In the electromagnetic theory, we know that the energy exchange is through what we know as photon, with Planck's constant h playing a very important role. If that is so, do we have a similar type of energy exchange I don't want to call it as a photon because our mindset is on electromagnetic theory as far as photon is concerned. So I would say if there is a energy exchange in terms of quanta, what would you like to name that energy quanta which is carried over in the gravitation? I would like to get a clear picture on, is there a way really we can distinguish and identify this quantum of gravitational energy?
Well, this question on the one hand has a simple answer in analogy with electromagnetism, but as I will explain towards the end of my answer, the problem is that this answer is still at the level of speculation and not conclusively proved as in the case of electromagnetism. Let me answer the question first simply. Indeed, if one thinks of the general theory of relativity as a theory of the gravitational field, if one thinks of the fact that there is a field theory and therefore just as we have the theory of quantum electrodynamics, which is the quantum version of Maxwell's equations, which is a classical field theory, one can imagine that the force of gravity will also be described by a field theory, and if such a quantum field theory existed, indeed gravity would be explained by exchange of particles which can be called as gravitons. However, even though the general theory of relativity and quantum mechanics and quantum field theory have been around for many years, even today we cannot put together the principles of general relativity and the principles of quantum mechanics and construct a consistent quantum theory of gravity. So even though we believe that there will be eventually a picture of gravity as being mediated by gravitons, I would not say that we have proved this. What we can say is that we believe that general relativity is equivalent to a field theory. Now this field theory is different from the field theory of electromagnetism because the carriers are of spin 2. Remember that photons are of spin 1. The gravitons are supposed to be massless, exactly like the photons. That is why gravity has long range. But the whole point is that the photon itself does not carry charge. So the theory of electromagnetism is a linear kind of theory. The graviton carries energy, and since every form of energy gravitates, gravity is a nonlinear theory. So if you try to construct a quantum theory of gravitation, you have to start from a linear theory but add on nonlinearities. It turns out that though you can do this, there are technical difficulties related to what are called as the normalization properties of these particular theories, and therefore even today we don't have a consistent quantum theory of gravity. This is an important frontier area of research which has been pursued for many years up till now, but even today there is no consistent quantum theory of gravity. So even though the picture is there, I don't think we have a real quantum theory of gravity. So one should be careful when one uses the notion of gravitons within the general theory of relativity.
I would also like to know more about the gravitational waves and what is the significance of the gravitational waves. Do they really exist, and if they do exist, are we in a position to identify them, and what is the signature and how do we identify them, and what is the actual physics which it is leading to? And then I will also add a more question to that. Can you also describe what actually the gravitational lensing means? I will be very thankful if you can explain that.
As I explained to you that the basic role which general relativity is going to play is in astrophysics. Now when Einstein put out to his general theory of relativity, he basically also sort of realized that unlike in Newton's theory, light is affected by the gravitational field, and therefore if you have starlight passing through the field of a star like the sun, then it would be deflected. Now once you have a deflection of light, then immediately you sort of realize that therefore when you look at the images formed by gravitational fields, then those images would have different positions from the true positions which they occupy in the sky. Therefore in some sense the gravitational field acts like a lens media. It's like a refractive media, and therefore you see that the effect of large scale gravitational field is to create virtual images of bodies in the universe. So therefore, the picture which we see of objects in the universe are in some sense the images or gravitational mirages being created by the large scale gravitational fields. And today such measurements can be made, and therefore when you look at the large scale structure of the universe, you can say something about the large scale distribution of galaxies if you looked at the images which are created by lensing in the universe. Now the other question which you asked about gravitational waves, that is another very exciting area of research, because even though Einstein predicted the theory that from the general theory of relativity that gravitational waves should exist in analogy with electromagnetic waves, because of the fact that the gravitational interaction is 10 raised to 39 times weaker compared to the electromagnetic interaction, you find that the strength of the gravitational wave and hence the ability to detect gravitational wave is so much weaker. So even though electromagnetic waves were discovered and in the lab immediately 2 or 3 a few years after Maxwell predicted them by Hertz in the laboratory, even today 100 years after the gravitational waves were predicted, we have not been able to see gravitational waves directly in the laboratory. This does not mean that gravitational waves have not been seen indirectly, because there are astrophysical systems like the binary pulsar which can be used to indirectly predict that gravitational waves indeed will have effects on them. And in 1974 Hulse and Taylor discovered what is called as the binary pulsar. Binary pulsars allow you to reconstruct the orbit of these pulsars very accurately, and in Newton's theory these pulsars would move on fixed orbits and therefore the orbits would not decay. In Einstein's theory of general relativity, gravitational waves are emitted by these systems, and therefore the orbits, instead of being closed orbits, would be inspiraling orbits. This changed orbit, this inspiraling orbit, has been measured, has been reconstructed by observations which were made by Hulse and Taylor, and this gave these gentlemen a Nobel Prize in 1993. So there is indirect evidence that gravitational waves exist, and therefore the challenge today is to try to directly detect gravitational waves on the earth. Do we do them today? Do we have experiments which can detect these gravitational waves today? Indeed, there are already experiments in progress. Since in the early 90s, there have been laser interferometers built in the US and in Europe. These detectors are called LIGO and Virgo. These detectors can detect have so much sensitivity that they can see the gravitational wave being emitted by strong sources like binary pulsars or binary black holes and so on. So these detectors, which have currently reached their design sensitivity, are expected to get sensitivities 10 times more in the next few years, and once that happens, we believe that gravitational waves would eventually be detected by detectors on the earth, and this will be the beginning of a new kind of astronomy which is currently referred to as gravitational wave astronomy. And the picture which this is going to give us of the universe is going to be very different from what we know from electromagnetism.
It would be nice if you can explain what is the current status of the experimental position in India as compared to our Western brothers in the field of gravitational waves and identification of the so-called what you mentioned as graviton, and how do we go about, and exactly where are we? Are we at the beginning of this field? Are we quite far away compared to, as I mentioned, our Western brothers? Can you please throw some light on that?
Okay, the situation is the following. Now I would like to sort of mention that the enterprise of gravitational wave detection has become an enterprise like in particle physics. The LIGO detector has what is called as the LIGO Science Collaboration, which has about 600 researchers, about 40 to 50 institutions, and all these people cooperate in analyzing the data which comes out of this particular detector. So currently, if you look at a paper which is written from the data which comes out from this particular detector, it is almost like a particle physics paper with which you are sort of familiar. The list of authors is almost bigger, it has almost runs over one page. Yeah. Now the whole point is, therefore, gravitational wave detection is a very cooperative kind of phenomena, and over the last few years me and my students at RRI have been involved in theoretical calculations of binary black holes or binary neutron stars in collaboration with my French colleagues, and we have been participating in this particular experiment by constructing theoretical waveforms which are required for the data analysis. At IUCA, my colleague Professor Sanjeev Dhurandhar has led a group and has been involved in doing data analysis for the gravitational wave efforts, and is part of the LIGO science collaborations. So you will find him as and his students as authors on these LIGO papers. Unfortunately, we don't have any experimental activity in this particular area in the country. That does not mean that we cannot do that. So recently, over the last couple of years, in collaboration with colleagues at IUCA, Professor Sanjeev Dhurandhar and Tarun Sauradeep, and Professor Unni Krishnan at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, we are looking at a feasible study for a gravitational wave experiment involving India in collaboration with the Australians, who have their own proposal for a detector which is called IGO. So currently we are trying to see whether in collaboration with the Australians we can set up an experimental facility in Australia, and later on, let's say about 2020, whether we can build our own detectors. I should like to sort of point out that gravitational wave detection is a very cooperative effect because of the fact that the signals are very weak. Only when you have a network of detectors can you be sure that the event is definitely there. So because of this, there is a large amount of cooperation between all the detector groups, and therefore we hope that the feasibility report turns out to be positive, and eventually we will put our feet out by trying to get up a prototype detector first, and then participate in an Australian effort in collaboration, and eventually come with our own detector in about 10 to 15 years. I would like to sort of add, your question is very, very pertinent, because many times we are interested in getting into a field, but we usually get into a field much after the field has matured. If we make the same mistake in this particular case, I believe we will lose an important opportunity. So in our considered opinion, it is the right epoch to get into this particular effort. If we start the effort now, we have a chance 10 years from now to be there when the gravitational wave astronomy opens a new window to the universe. If it does not happen, I think we will lose a chance, and therefore I think that it is very, very important for our funding agencies to take this proposal seriously, assess it, and make a decision about going ahead with it as early as possible. If not, we will miss a chance to be part of an exciting opening window which is happening right now.
In the present day context, there are so many thrilling research papers coming out in the gravitational field, and several youngsters are interested in pursuing these studies. So what will be your advice for them to enter this field, and how should they go about, and how should they decide on which actual topic or choose the problem for their career? Can you please explain that?
Well, currently, as I told you, there are very small groups at RRI and IUCA which can help students work for, do their research in areas of source modeling and gravitational wave data analysis. But as I said, it is a limited kind of success. We really have to encourage young people to get into the gravity wave experiments. So what I would say is that the younger people who want to take up challenges, they can be people from engineering backgrounds or from physics backgrounds, they should get in touch with the people who are now trying to set up prototype facilities. For example, as I explained to you, we are hoping to set up a prototype in TIFR under Professor Unni Krishnan. Some initial experiments will start off right away. So I would say that if people get in touch with people who are planning these experiments, they can get trained in the different aspects which are involved in these particular experiments. Our colleagues in the US have also agreed to sponsor a few students under their research visiting students program to expose them to actual detection techniques on prototypes or actual detectors and so on. So I would say that they should get in touch with the people working on the experiment either in India or in the US and try to explore the experimental aspects of this particular subject, because we believe that there are spin-offs of this particular experiment to many other branches. We expect that there will be spin-offs to high quality timekeeping, to high quality vacuum systems, to high quality seismic systems, and therefore we believe that an effort in this particular direction will not only build up credibility in gravitational wave physics, but also in high quality experimental physics in India. So I would say that experimental physics should be, people, younger students should also take seriously the option of getting into experimental areas and not just focus their attention only on exotic theoretical studies, because at the end of the day only physics is all about experiments, and unless you have cutting edge experiments, I don't think we can ever make cutting edge progress. And if you ask the question, why are there no Nobel Prizes in India, I would say it is because we are not focused enough on high technology experiments and high technology areas. So to answer the question which we keep asking all the time, why don't we have high quality science, I would say high quality science is only possible if experimental physics is encouraged in all the universities, IITs and IISERs, and the government realizes that funding high quality experimental research is the stepping stone to high quality performance in sciences.
It's been a very nice thing and a very pleasure for me to talk to you, Bala, on the general theory of relativity and learn myself. I am sure the students are very much benefited by your lectures, and thank you very much for coming over here and sparing your time.
Hello and welcome to the topic Aims and Functions of Education. Introduction to the concept of education. By definition, education is a transfer of knowledge from one generation to another. It is a system of practice of teaching and learning. In its broadest meaning, education is any process by which an individual gains knowledge or insight or develops attitude or skill. In its deepest meaning of the term education, it means to plunge a man's body, mind and soul of ignorance. It enhances an individual's personality and provides him confidence to reach out to the world. Education is a Latin word which includes three Latin words, namely educare, which means to nourish, educare, that means to lead forth, and educatum, meaning the act of teaching. However, education has got a deep meaning. It is not just becoming literate or getting a degree or simply gaining knowledge or learning new skills. So, let us go through what different thinkers have said about education. According to Rabindranath Tagore, education enables the mind to find out the ultimate truth, which emancipates us from the bondage of dust. Again, according to Gandhiji, education is an all-round development and drawing out the best in the child, mind, body and spirit. Thus, the Indian interpreters gave stress on the mental, moral, social, physical and intellectual aspects of a human being. But according to Western thinkers like John Dewey, education is the development of all the activities in the individual enabling him to control his environment. And G.S. Thompson says that education is the influence of the environment on the individual to bring a permanent change in habits and behavior. So, Western interpreters considered education has to give stress on the growth and development of the individual in relation to his environment. Some features which help us to define education process are cited below. It is a lifelong process, that is, a process of development from infancy to maturity. It is a bipolar process which includes the interplay of the educator and educand. It is also a tripolar process including the interplay of the educator, educand and social process. It is a deliberate process in which the educator is aware of his aim. It is a preserver and transmitter of heritage, that is, the cultural heritage is transmitted from one generation to generation. It is a progressive in the sense it changes according to the needs and demands of the society. So, we can conclude education as a dynamic process which involves the interplay of the educator, educand and the social forces to make an individual socially adjustable and responsible. Module 2. Aims of education. Aims are general statements which provide direction or intent to educational action. The aims of education have been categorized variously by different scholars. Herbert Spencer believed in the complete living aim. Another famous thinker, Herbert, advocated the moral aim of education. The complete living aim signifies that education should prepare us for life. It should be meant for the complete development or perfection of nature. The first and most important aim of education is all-round development of an individual. It civilizes the man. It inculcates some values and some principles and also prepares a human being for social life. The moral aim of Herbert states that education should help to grow moral values in children. Along with imparting knowledge and giving vocation training, education should assist development of moral habits. There is another social aim, which means education should produce effective individuals in the sense that they realize their responsibility towards the society. Edmund Burke states, education is an intercourse with the world, with men and with affairs. Anyways, education is for the betterment of the individual and in the long run for the society. It should make a person an improved version of himself and the world a much better place to live in. Some of the most commonly discussed aims of education are given below. Knowledge aim. There will be no argument that the aim of education is the acquisition of knowledge, skills and attitude. Education helps to attain certain skills to live in a society as a human being and civilized one. Philosophers and educationists of the world believe in knowledge. It is a valuable asset of life which helps the individual to overcome misery and problems of life. The vocational aim. The idea that education should enable a person to earn his livelihood exists since antiquity. The primitive people taught skills to their young generation with this purpose. Knowledge aim of education is narrow by nature. Gandhiji realized it in 1937 when he introduced basic education. Vocational aim develops the social efficiency of the individual. Realizing this aspect, Indian Education Commission introduces work experiences in the curriculum. It is intended to develop proficiency in a particular vocation which helps an individual to attain a job after his or her education. Character building aim. The Indian concept of education believes in self-realization. Self-realization is possible through moral education. So, the individual should cultivate moral virtues or values which constitute character. Swami Vivekananda suggests, we want that education by which character is formed, strength of mind is increased, the intellect is expanded, and by which one can stand on one's own feet, the complete living aim. An individual has various aspects to be developed. Every aspect of the personality is reflected in various activities to be performed. Education should help the individual to fulfill the various needs and necessities of life, like self-preservation, fulfilling necessities of life, rearing and bearing of children, performing civic responsibilities, and utilizing his leisure time properly. Firstly, the individual must know the art of self-preservation. Secondly, education should enable him to earn his living. Thirdly, he should know how to take care of his own children. Lastly, he must have the idea how to utilize the leisure hours properly in a profiting manner. The democratic aim. One of the important aims of education suggested by Secondary Education Commission is to develop the democratic citizenship. India is a democratic country. Even citizens must have to realize the duties and responsibilities carefully. So, the aim of education is to train carefully the future citizens. Training should be provided to develop the following qualities of the individual: capacity for clear thinking, receptivity of new idea, clarity in speech and writing, true patriotism. The cultural aim of education. Continuity in man's social life is possible through this process. The valuable cultural heritage, which has accumulated a vast store of human knowledge and experience, is transmitted to the coming generation through education. Culture includes arts, science, religions, and the social customs developed gradually by many people contributing to it. It has to be conserved and transmitted to the youth for the cultural growth of the nation. Progressive aim of education. Education is not only the necessary for the conservation of the culture, but is also essential for its progress. The dynamic process of education operates in this direction. Man has been moving on the way of progress since the beginning of the world. Possessing a superior nervous system, he discovered and invented ways and means for making his life more comfortable. Education enhances his efficiency for exploring and utilizing the natural resources around him. Dewey has propounded the theory that the main purpose of education is to modify the behavior of the child in such a way that he may be able to adjust himself to his environment and to modify his environment to accord with his own. Social efficiency as an aim of education. The aim of social efficiency is identical with the progressive aim of education presented by John Dewey, the American pragmatist. He says that the child has to develop social efficiency and learn skills for proper adjustment in his everyday life. In the modern age, social efficiency is considered as one of the greatest skills in human being. Education should enable the child to participate constructively in democratic group life and to play different roles of life effectively and efficiently. Social growth or the development of social efficiency in a child is a very significant process. A child's social efficiency or inefficiency affects his entire life. He lives in a complicated world, and education should enable him to meet the challenges of this dynamic world successfully. Efficiency in social adjustment is a most sought for quality in the modern times. According to Dewey, The process of education has psychological as well as sociological aspects. The psychological aspects are the basis of whole process, and the teacher has to consider the nature, interest and potentialities of the learners. Personality development as an aim of education. The most accepted, comprehensive and modern aim of education is the proper development of the personality of the student. It implies development in all the aspects of their life, that is mental, physical, social and even emotional. Plato said that nothing should be taught to children which were not conducive to the promotion of virtue in them. Intelligence plays a major role in the process of learning, hence the development of the intellect is told as one aim of education by many people. Educators are of the opinion that one aspect of human life should not be developed at the expense of others. Instead, development should be in all directions to result ultimately in the development of entire personality. Functions of education. As we discussed the aims of education above, it is clear that education is essential for every society and individual. It can be told as life itself, but not a preparation for life. Man has various qualities. These qualities of the individual should be developed for the improvement of the country. So, education plays a complementary role for overall